In the heart of Burkina Faso's arid landscape lies Zongo, a village where the relentless sun beats down on red earth and the struggle for water defines daily existence. This is the story of how a simple cup of water, offered with dignity despite desperate circumstances, became the catalyst for transforming not just one life, but an entire nation's approach to serving its most vulnerable citizens. The midday sun blazed mercilessly over Zongo, transforming the dusty roads into ribbons of scorching earth. Our Traoré wiped the sweat from her brow with a worn headscarf, her weathered hands steadying the clay water pot balanced on her head. Each step from the distant well back to her mud-brick home required careful calculation. Water was too precious to waste even a drop. The military convoy appeared suddenly, emerging from the heat shimmer like a mirage. 3 vehicles, their engines protesting against the oppressive temperature, slowed to a halt near the village center. Soldiers emerged, their uniforms darkened with sweat, seeking respite in whatever shade the acacia trees could offer. Awa paused, watching as one soldier separated from the group. Unlike the others, he carried himself with quiet authority, his eyes scanning the village with genuine interest rather than detachment. When their gazes met, she saw something unexpected, exhaustion mixed with humility. "Madame," he called, out in Moray, the local language, his voice hoarse from the dust. "Could you spare some water?" The other villagers had retreated into their homes, wary of military presence. But Awa recognized something in this young man's demeanor that reminded her of her own son, who had left for the capital years ago seeking work. Without hesitation, she lowered her water pot and reached for the small calabash she carried. The water she poured was meant for her family's evening meal, but hospitality ran deeper than personal need in her veins. "Drink, my son," she said simply, offering the cup. The soldier accepted gratefully, drinking slowly, savoring each sip. "When," he finished, he looked at her with profound respect. "You offer water to a stranger when you clearly have little. May I know your name?" "Awa Traoré," she replied. "And water shared is never wasted." He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his serious features. "I am Ibrahim. Thank you, Madame Traoré. Your kindness will not be forgotten." As the convoy prepared to leave, Ibrahim pressed a small amount of money into her palm, despite her protests. But it was the look in his eyes, a promise unspoken, that lingered long after the vehicles disappeared into the dusty horizon. That evening, as Awa divided the remaining water among her grandchildren, she thought little of the encounter. Soldiers came and went. Life in Zongo continued its harsh routine. She had no idea that the young captain she'd helped would soon become President Ibrahim Traoré, or that her simple act of kindness had planted a seed that would grow into something extraordinary. 6 months passed before the winds of change reached Zongo. Awa continued her daily trek to the well, each journey a test of endurance as the dry season tightened its grip. The memory of the soldier named Ibrahim had faded into the countless small interactions that punctuated village life. Then came the morning when everything shifted. The radio in the village chief's compound crackled with unprecedented news. Captain Ibrahim Traoré had assumed leadership of Burkina Faso, promising sweeping reforms focused on the forgotten corners of the nation. Awa listened with mild interest until the broadcast mentioned a massive water infrastructure project, $145 million dedicated to bringing clean water to rural communities. "Every Burkinabe deserves dignity," the voice on the radio declared. "Water is not a luxury, it is a fundamental right." The words stirred something in Awa's memory. That voice, could it be? She dismissed the thought. Surely the soldier who had drunk from her calabash couldn't be the same man now leading the nation. Weeks later, government surveyors arrived in Zongo. They mapped water sources, tested soil, and spoke extensively with villagers about their needs. The chief called a meeting under the great baobab tree where such matters were traditionally discussed. "They say President Traoré himself selected our village for the pilot program," the chief announced, his voice heavy with disbelief. "Modern pumps, filtration systems, distribution points throughout Zongo." The crowd erupted in animated discussion. Skepticism mixed with hope, Promises from the capital had disappointed them before, but something felt different this time. The surveyors weren't just collecting data. They were listening, truly listening to what the people needed. Awa's neighbor Mariama grabbed her arm excitedly. "Can you imagine? Water flowing from taps right here in our compound." Before Awa could respond, a commotion arose at the village entrance. A convoy of vehicles appeared, this time accompanied by government officials and, surprisingly, journalists. The lead vehicle bore the presidential insignia. As the door opened, Awa's heart skipped. The man who emerged was unmistakably Ibrahim, though now he wore civilian clothes rather than military fatigues. His eyes swept across the gathered crowd until they found her. The president of Burkina Faso walked directly to where Awa stood, the crowd parting in stunned silence. When he reached her, he did something that would be recounted in Zongo for generations. He bowed slightly, a gesture of profound respect. "Madame Compaoré," he said, loud enough for all to hear, "I told you your kindness would not be forgotten. Today we begin transforming not just Zongo, but every village where good people like you have survived without the basic dignity of clean water." Awa stood speechless as President Traoré continued, addressing the crowd but maintaining eye contact with her. 6 months ago, this woman shared her precious water with a thirsty soldier. She didn't know who I was, didn't calculate what she might gain. She simply saw someone in need and responded with humanity. He gestured to the convoy. That single act reminded me why I serve. It reminded me that our nation's strength lies not in its cities or resources, but in the character of people like Madame Compaoré. Today, we begin repaying that debt of kindness. The transformation of Zongo began with the sound of drilling. Heavy machinery arrived within weeks, their operators working alongside local laborers who knew every contour of the land. President Traoré had kept his word. This wasn't just another bureaucratic promise dissolving into dust. Awa watched from her doorway as engineers marked locations for water distribution points. They consulted with her and other women who had spent lifetimes calculating the most efficient routes from well to home. Their traditional knowledge merged with modern technology, creating solutions that honored both progress and wisdom. The president returned monthly, eschewing the usual official protocols. He would arrive early, often catching the workers at dawn, his sleeves rolled up as he reviewed plans and sometimes grabbed tools himself. During one visit, he sought out Awa specifically. "The engineers tell me you suggested relocating the main distribution point," he said, studying a technical drawing. "They were skeptical until they realized your route would serve 30 more families." Awa nodded modestly. "I've walked these paths for 40 years. The water knows where it wants to flow." Traoré smiled at her traditional way of explaining hydrology. "This is exactly why we need to listen. Development without community wisdom is just another form of colonialism." As construction progressed, Zongo became a model for the national program. Journalists documented the changes, but Traoré insisted the focus remain on the villagers, not his administration. He understood that sustainable change required ownership by those who would maintain these systems long after the cameras left. The day the first tap was tested, the entire village gathered. Awa was chosen to turn the handle, a moment heavy with symbolism. As clear water gushed forth, children shrieked with delight, running their hands through the stream. Elderly women wept openly, remembering loved ones lost to waterborne diseases. But the changes went beyond infrastructure. Traoré's administration established training programs for local youth to maintain the water systems. Young people who might have fled to cities seeking opportunity now had skilled jobs in their own communities. Awa's grandson, Musa, became one of the first certified technicians. "Grandmother," Musa said one evening, his eyes bright with purpose, "I'm not just fixing pipes, I'm protecting our future." The ripple effects continued. With reliable water, women like Awa no longer spent hours fetching water. That time was redirected into small businesses, education, and community development. A women's cooperative formed, with Awa as an unofficial advisor, using the new water access to start vegetable gardens and a small textile operation. During another presidential visit, Traoré found Awa at the cooperative, teaching younger women traditional dyeing techniques now made more efficient, with readily available water. "You've become quite the entrepreneur," he observed with genuine admiration. Awa laughed, a sound that had become more frequent in recent months. "You gave us water, Monsieur le Président. We simply remembered what to do with it." "No," Traoré corrected gently. "You gave me water when I was just a thirsty soldier." That reminder of our shared humanity shaped every decision I've made since. Burkina Faso is changing because people like you never forgot what matters. As news of Zongo's transformation spread, delegations arrived from other African nations seeking to replicate the model. The village that once symbolized rural neglect had become a blueprint for responsive governance and community-centered development. 2 years after that first gush of clean water, Zongo had transformed beyond recognition. The dusty paths were now lined with thriving gardens, the air filled with laughter from the new school built near the water distribution center. But it was the subtle changes that spoke loudest, the straight backs of women no longer burdened by water jugs, the clear eyes of children free from waterborne diseases, the sense of possibility that permeated every conversation. Awa Compaoré sat in the shade of the newly planted mango trees, watching her granddaughters practice reading. The cooperative she helped establish now employed 40 women and had contracts to supply textiles to markets in Ouagadougou. The land that had once barely sustained life now bloomed with opportunity. President Traoré arrived that morning for what he announced would be his final official visit to Zongo as president. His term was ending, and he had kept his promise to serve only as long as the people needed him. But this visit was different. He came not with an entourage, but with a small group of international observers, including representatives from the United Nations Water Initiative. Madame Compaoré, the UN representative, a woman named Dr. Sarah Kabangu, approached her with reverence. "I've heard your story across 3 continents. The Zongo model, as we call it, has inspired water projects from Mali to Mozambique. Would you share your thoughts on what made this transformation possible?" Awa considered the question, her weathered hands folded in her lap. "Water is life," she began simply. But what transformed Zongo wasn't just the pipes and pumps. It was recognizing that every human being deserves dignity. When someone is thirsty, you share your water. When a nation is thirsty, a true leader shares the nation's resources. President Traoré, who had been supervising the installation of a new solar-powered purification system, joined them. The years of leadership had added lines to his face, but his eyes held the same humility Awa had recognized that first day. "Dr. Kabangu," he interjected, "wants to document our approach for a global summit. I've told her the secret is simple. Listen to the grandmothers. They know where the water should flow." The group laughed, but the truth in his words was evident. Everywhere they looked, the water project had succeeded because it honored local knowledge, empowered communities, and treated access to clean water as a fundamental right rather than a political tool. That afternoon, the village organized a celebration. Traditional drums echoed across the landscape as people from neighboring communities arrived to witness the inauguration of the Regional Water Training Center, a facility that would ensure the sustainability of water projects across the province. As the sun began its descent, casting golden light over the transformed village, Awa found herself standing beside President Traoré at the original water distribution point, the one she had helped position. "I never thanked you properly," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of the journey they had shared. "Not just for the water that day, but for reminding me why we serve. Every decision I've made, every project we've initiated, has been guided by that moment of simple human kindness." Awa smiled, her eyes reflecting years of wisdom. "A nation is like a garden, young man. Leaders plant seeds, but it's the people who tend them. You gave us the tools to tend our garden. We gave you the reminder of why gardens matter." As if orchestrated, children ran past them toward the water taps, their laughter echoing off the walls of the new community center. A group of young women discussed business plans near the cooperative building. Teenagers worked on the solar panels that would power the water system indefinitely. The transformation was complete, yet it was only beginning. Months later, when international media asked President Traoré about his legacy as he prepared to leave office, he would point to villages like Zongo. Leadership isn't about grand gestures, he would say. It's about recognizing that a grandmother sharing her last cup of water represents the nobility of the human spirit. Our job as leaders is to ensure that such generosity is never again necessary for survival, but remains as a choice that elevates us all. The story of Awa and Ibrahim became more than just a tale of kindness rewarded. It evolved into a parable for a new kind of governance, one rooted in empathy, sustained by community wisdom, and measured not by statistics, but by the laughter of children playing in water they once could only dream of. As night fell over Zongo, the solar lights illuminated pathways where darkness once reigned. The sound of water flowing through pipes provided a gentle rhythm to the evening's activities. And somewhere in the distance, the call to evening prayer reminded everyone that some blessings flow as inevitably as water finding its way home. When leaders remember to serve, and communities remember their strength, the cup of water Awa had offered to a thirsty soldier had indeed changed her life, but more profoundly, it had reminded a nation that transformation begins with recognizing the dignity in every human being. In a world often cynical about change, Zongo stood as proof that kindness, when met with responsive leadership, could reshape the very landscape of possibility. Years later, when visitors would ask about the miracle of Zongo, old-timers would smile and point to the water taps. It started with a cup of water, they would say, and a leader who remembered how to be human. And in that simple truth lay the blueprint for progress that no amount of foreign aid or political rhetoric could replicate. The understanding that development begins when we see each other's humanity and respond with open hands. The water continues to flow in Zongo, as does the story of how one act of kindness became a river of change, carrying with it the hopes of a nation that learned to transform compassion into policy and leadership into service. In the end, Awa's gift wasn't just water to a thirsty man. It was the reminder that the smallest acts of humanity can unleash the greatest transformations, flowing from one heart to another until an entire country is renewed.